The equations are not going to be as helpful. That's a little more complicated. Think about the series. It is. What would those struggle? Creator just videos. I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. All right. Everybody, I would like you to close your laptops. Take out a piece of paper. If you don't have a piece of paper, somebody share. Get a writing instrument. Put your name at the top of the paper. Oh God, I didn't do pop quizzes in 11th grade. I have a pencil if you need one. I stopped using pens because I kept inking my shirts up ridiculous. Okay, put your name at the top of the page. Question 1. Who wrote Marketing Myopia? Excuse me. Don't look on your friend's paper. Come on. I was in Catholic school, Sister Agnes would hit me with a ruler. Question 2. What year was it published from the document that you were reading? Question 3. In what publication was it printed? And finally, question 4. Name one central point you got from the article. Need a piece of paper? No. Okay. Don't look at it. Pull out a piece of paper, write your name on it. Question 1, who wrote Marketing Myopia? Question 2 is, what year was it published? Question 3, where was it published? Not city, but publication. And the last is, name one central point that you got from the article. Doesn't matter what it is. When you finish, if you would pass them towards the center. These are your bonus points for the next step. You never know. Hey, if you don't try, you can't win. That's the old saying.
So he's not focusing on the admin stuff and reading the actual. Reading the actual.
All right, every one of them up. Okay, so who wrote Marketing Myopia?
Theodore Levitt.
Theodore Levitt. Ted Levitt would have done as well. What year did he write it?
1960.
1960. What was the publication that it was published in? Yep. And the name, the central ideas we'll talk about today. And so, very good. I see I've got a lot of marketing scholars in here. This is first part of this class. You're going to just kind of take it a little bit loose because there's some real key things I would like for you to learn today that, of course, you're going to need very much to have these ultimately for the test. But it's also understand, I want you to get the vibe and understanding. Y'all are graduate students now. You can work without a net. So the basic, learn and regurgitate stuff about marketing, you're past that, all right? And now we're in this second level of understanding the real core essence of what marketing is. And this was one of the great seminal articles that has ever been written. It took marketing by a firestorm. And it's fascinating, interesting. Jerome McCarthy wrote the first seminal book on marketing management in 1960 as well. And so this is considered a bellwether year for marketing. And especially what he talked about here, because these are vital, important things to understand if you consider what marketing is all about. So it was written by Theodore Levitt. Now this is basically, there was a second article that was written in 1975 that did updated comments where it talked about that particular article. So I'm kind of using slides that were generated from this. And this is Theodore Levitt, the man himself. So who is a professor at Harvard Business School. One of the unique things in the COB, folks, I'm not sure if you know this, is that practitioners in business are just as respected as individuals who are PhDs like myself. The capstone course in marketing, which is the marketing management one, which is like the undergraduate marketing strategy class, is actually taught by a practitioner, an instructor who has 30 years in the business. Practitioners are important to business. When I write journal articles, if there's not anything in there that is not applicable to the practitioner, then the journal article has a very difficult time trying to get accepted. So he was the dean of marketing and not a professor. He started maybe with marketing myopia. He was a lecturer at Harvard, not a professor. He was the man who came up with the concept of globalization. And once again, these kind of things are not necessarily inventions in themselves or even discoveries, but they're basically paradigm shifts in our conceptions in the way that we think. And this is certainly what Theodore Levitt did. He brought about a whole new way, a whole new understanding of what marketing should be, all right? So the article was written in 1960, and it revolutionized the thought processes that business managers have always done. And as they focus on the products that they sell, which is short-sighted or myopic, as Levitt calls it, all right? The most important question that any business or any industry asks itself is, what business are we in? Because in the essence of that question, it gives you the focus ultimately of what you're in business for. And if your focus is on the products that you make, that is the definition of myopic, all right? Companies have to define their businesses on the needs and the desires of their customers and think of themselves as customer satisfying institutions. They need to focus themselves on their ability to create value for consumers. Otherwise, they get lost in the trade. So this is the definition of myopia. If you don't know it, it's Greek, actually. It comes from myos. I forgot what it is, but it's the one-headed god. Anyway, it's nearsightedness. It can also mean a lack of imagination or intellectual insight. It basically comes from the thought of looking at the world through the lens of a periscope. And that's basically all that you see in life. And that's what myopia means. So how does it correlate to this? Well, this is his premise. His premise is that companies decline because they did not define themselves, and they did not define themselves properly. And so a couple of the ones that they talk about here, especially, is that the railroad industry defined itself as the railroad industry instead of what is the value that they drive to consumers, which is the transportation industry or the good movings industry. Now, let me also say this: railroad has had a turnaround, especially at the turn of the 21st century. Railroads in the United States carry 85 to 90% of all mass goods across the US, and generally trucks carry 10 to 15% in last miles. Railroads have had a birth, but the problem that it doesn't have is that because railroads are not used in the United States for transportation, we use planes and cars for transportation in the US. Interestingly enough, in Europe, it's swapped. It's the other way around. You see a predominant amount of truck traffic and transportation on railroads. Hollywood industry was focused itself on being in Hollywood versus understanding itself as being in the entertainment industry, which was important. And then finally, the petroleum industry focused itself on petroleum when it should consider itself is in the delivery of energy to consumers. That's ultimately what you wish to be able to do, because the other thing that it does is it brings you to a focus that doesn't necessarily change. And that's one of the things, because if there's anything we know about the world as it is, the world changes, and it changes constantly. The shadow of obsolescence. By the way, does anybody know what obsolescence means versus obsolete? I use obsolescence a lot, and it's a good word. Remember what it means. Obsolete is a tool or a device that no longer has a use, like having whale bones used for women's corsets. That would be an example, all right? Obsolescence means it's a perfectly functioning thing, but something can be done or used now that is more efficient and less expensive. And that's what obsolescence means. Doesn't mean that it doesn't function anymore, but quite simply, time has moved on. Certainly, IBM PCs are still working even to this day, but they're clearly obsolescent. And so it's kind of interesting, the ones that he puts out, and it's interesting in 75, they changed those as well. I find it interesting that, of course, the supermarket got a better idea of understanding customer needs in the grocery stores. And it's interesting how we're flipping around and we're going back to the neighborhood grocery stores if you consider the Dollar General. So the average supermarket in the United States has anywhere from 51,000 to 160,000 separate items in every store. Now think about that. That is astonishing when you put it in, and realize the standard goods in any supermarket, the average profit is about 2%. The number one thing that supermarkets make money on is the delis, and they cut their own meat. Those two things, and those are the things that they make the most money on. However, what we find is that because Dollar General is being more consumer focused, one of the things that you have is you have these problems of what they call, food deserts. And the food deserts are places and locations where the larger supermarkets decided they didn't want to be anymore. And Dollar General has decided that that's where they're going to come in and do their job. Okay, so the shadow of obsolescence says that there are threats within the industries, and if you're unprepared, they can cripple your corporation. This is the big mistake that Microsoft made in focusing, target focusing on their operating system and not deciding to move on and seeing where technology was moving. And there was a clear showing that mobile technology was on its way. But they dithered, and to the profit of Apple, of course, and to Android. One of the things that he talked about is that business people get in what they call this self-deceiving cycle. In other words, these are the catchphrases that go on in their own minds. And these phrases go over and over in our head. And in essence, this smug assuredness that these are going to always be true. And as long as you have these things be true, you're always going to have success in your industries. The first is that growth is assured. Let me first talk about these, okay? So there are 4 conditions that the self-deceiving cycle are. And I'll go through these one at a time. He put them all down to here, but let's go through the next ones because each one of these is described. And so the first one is that the growth is assured by expanding an affluent population. Well, the problem with that is that you're assuming that market growth is perpetual, and that you will always have assured profits based upon an expanding population. And the expectations is that purchases will always increase. Well, if this very same thing was true, we'd be still selling corsets. Well, they are, but not as many. But to base this face on that you're always going to have an ever-increasing population presupposes that you're going to keep riding this into a continual way. Markets expand, grow, and then mature and even decline. It is a limiting of your imagination. It puts yourself in the smug assurances that I can just take my forecasting program and do a spreadsheet, do a plus 4%, and that'll be next year's sales growth. It is not only an absence of a problem, but it's an absence of thought. The next one is and this comes directly from the selling era of marketing, is the focus on production is always to produce. The drive is to produce, because if I can sell 1,000 and make a certain amount of money, then I'll sell 1,000,000 and I'll make more. You get caught up in the economies of scale, thinking that you're always constantly going to be able to achieve success, and that all that marketing has to do is just sell whatever's popping out of the factory at this one time. At the latter part of the 60s, they started to have pressure from the outside world, especially Japan. Japan started producing excellent compacts and subcompacts that were being sold in the United States. And GM and Ford and Chrysler, AMC as well, decided that they were going to try to produce small cars, but they just couldn't simply produce them as well or even in the styles that consumers desired. Now, there are some interesting things that happen that people didn't get a hold of, or the marketing gurus didn't at that time. The Ford Mustang, when it was developed in 1964 by Lee Iacocca and, oh gosh, what was his name? John DeLorean. One of the things that the Ford Mustang was going to do was to create that third automobile. So what does that mean? Okay. Right after World War II, you had what were known as one-car families. In other words, there was no cars that, other than the one vehicle that was used in a family. The next thing during the 50s was the growth of the two-car family, in which there were two vehicles, the mom and the dad could drive around, and then whoever were the children, they could be able to use that car. Well, the 60s brought about the revolution of what was known as the three-car family, which meant that a third car was bought for the children to be able to drive around. And this was the advent of the thought of the original Ford Mustang. So the Mustang was actually a compact car, and it was kind of racy. It started with a 4-cylinder engine, also with a straight six. It wasn't a pony car at the time per se, but it became a beefy one as well. It had 3 models. One of them was a bucket seat model, and another one was what we call a drop top, which was a convertible. And the Ford Mustang was amazingly successful when it came out. Now, here's the thing. If they had been looking at the research, they would have found that 2/3 of the individuals who were driving Ford Mustangs were individuals between the ages of 35 and 55, predominantly male, that were using them to drive to work. So what they were looking for was efficient, inexpensive automobiles. And this is kind of that difficulty, is that when your genius is focused on production, you're not necessarily looking for, you're looking past the actual consumers that use your car. And so this is one of those difficulties that goes along. Also, the other part of that is the thought of what's known as planned obsolescence, which basically states that your cars go out of style every 3 years. And that was inherent in all cars that were being built in the United States, starting into the 70s especially. And if planned obsolescence meant that you bought a new car every 3 years, you don't need the car to hold together beyond 3 years, do you? Well, guess what? That's not what Toyota was thinking, or Datsun at the time, which became Nissan. They wanted to build cars that would last forever. And where's it put them now? Toyota, well, no, excuse me. Tesla's the number one manufacturer of auto. No, Tesla's the number one profit center of automobiles in the world right now. Toyota is the number one manufacturer of vehicles now. I think it's something like 15 million automobiles every year now. And they build every vehicle to last as long as it possibly can. So these are the kind of myopic things that happen that basically create this this myopic view that doesn't go on. Here's the other thing is, anybody in here an engineer, do a lot of R&D? Good, I can speak freely. The problem with research and development, especially for you, those of you who go and do a lot of number crunching and analytics, listen to this very closely, is that when you're a hammer, the world becomes a nail, all right? And you look at everything that you're wanting to do, you're trying to think of the data first. And so when it comes down to research and product development, those are things we can do. We know how to do research, and research is cool. And the problem with that is marketing tends to be a residual activity. Why? Because I can't control consumers. You know, the controllable variables, the things that I can write down and do calculations with, those give me comfort as an engineer. But people or consumers are unpredictable, they're varied, they're fickle, whatever you want to call it, all right? They're tough. You know, it's interesting, any of you who do research, by the way, if you do it like I have to, you know, the research stuff that we use is no different than the research that's used in chemistry and physics and all like that. But what we can do, but with our stuff in psychology and marketing, if we can predict what 15% of the population will do, then we're doing well, okay? We have what's called our beta coefficients and power. And what we're hopefully trying to do is to be able to predict a piece of the market. Now, if we're predicting 15% of the population of the United States, that's 45 to 60 million people, however you want to measure it. So that's pretty good, all right? But our research, we accept the fact that people are goofy, all right? And research and development doesn't like goofy. They like the numbers to add up with no residuals. And the last is that basically the consumer is basically treated as one of those necessary things that they have to go through. The questions about marketers and customers aren't really asked. There's more excitement in the products that they sell than the consumers. And usually what you'll find is articles are generally detailed towards production and not necessarily marketing. If you look at any magazine of any kind of technology, especially, there's a target fascination with the product itself and not with the consumers that they're selling to. And so that's ultimately one of those issues that it comes to myopia. It's normal, all right? It's not unreasonable, but we have to fight our basic instincts not to fascinate ourselves with the production that we make and think about the consumers that we're selling to. To understand the customer satisfying viewpoint is not only vital, it is absolute if we're going to be successful in marketing. It violates the rules of the scientific method. If you're defining the problem and you're saying the failure's in the consumer, then you failed in the equation. You define the problem with your products first. You develop a hypothesis to solve the problem. And if customer satisfaction, this is 1960, I would say value. If value is not being considered, then you have an issue. And yes, selling and marketing are incredibly different because selling basically is the selling of a product that already exists. And marketing is in the creation and the production of a value-related substance. And so if we're going to be marketers, the first thing we do is we look at our consumers. That's the first thing we have to do, no matter what we're making or what we're thinking of. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about like how some visionaries that have come up with like truly new products, like kind of nobody knew they wanted or needed.
Yeah, innovation is fascinating. I will totally agree with you there. Who comes up with it and how would they do it? How do we unlock the mind of Palace Athene? How do we open that up and find where true creation happens? There's so many ways to think about that. A lot of times it's just connections, all right? A lot of times it is reading a particular thing, an association idea brings you to another idea, and basically those things build upon themselves. Usually they happen or they start in what we call inductive logic. In other words, you start with a premise. You have an assumption that is grounded in theory, all right? So the first thing that for an example is that we have this phone and there's a device that consumers are carrying around, and the carrying around of this particular device is convenient. And one of the first things that when it became a phone was, well, everybody's not going to spend all their time on the phone, so let's make a little game called Snake, and Snake became one of those things. Well, along this time in 1992, Philip Kahn was a man who was the writer of a software program called Borland International. He created Turbo Pascal, which was a Pascal operating system that you could learn to write programs on. Borland International grew. It bought up some other software. It tried to compete with Microsoft Office, crashed and burned in the early 90s. You can look it up, Philippe Kahn, that's his name. Well, in the mid to 90s, he came up with this idea of a camera so small with a digital lens that it could fit practically anywhere. And so this one little invention was created. And then the individuals who were creating the phone said, you got this little device, maybe people would like to take pictures on it. Well, people started taking pictures on it. But then pretty soon what happened is that you needed more memory. Memory production had been dramatically increasing over the years. And now all of a sudden you needed more memory in the systems. And now all of a sudden people are starting to buy smartphones in bunches. Now what happens is that the individuals who can write software suddenly start gravitating to the operating systems where the most people are. It's how those things happen, all right? Pretty soon what happened was Microsoft as an operating system started failing, not because Microsoft failed, but they, through marketing myopia, failed to create a mobile platform that consumers desired, and said, well, those consumers, they don't want Windows operating systems on mobile devices. It's their fault. Thank you, Microsoft. Okay. So Google grew. All right. Anybody do any app building? I've done app writing. So one of the things, here's another thing is Google encourages you. I got a lifetime license to write apps, and it cost me like $45 when it started. Apple, their iOS app writing development program is $200 every year. Okay. So wouldn't it be natural for that to gravitate? These things all have connections with each other. And where does innovation come? It comes from unique ideas that haven't been considered before. I'm going to go through one, and I'm going to show you one, especially when it comes to Henry Ford. But it just comes up with somebody who decides that they're going to think of things in a different way. All right? They're going to do things different. And just in that difference, you can get enormous failures and you can achieve incredible successes. You know what? I'm going to lead into this Henry Ford thing I'm going to show you, because Henry Ford has often talked about being the first great marketer. And in many ways he was, even though he was said to have said that you can have any color you want as long as it's black. But the truth is, and I've actually read Ford's diaries, you can look at it online. Ford said, yes, black is the only color I have. But he said that in 1924, when they were producing 200,000 Model Ts, and the only color that would dry fast enough was called Japanese black. That was the only one. By 1926, what they found were enough different resins to be able to dry faster, and that's when you started seeing colors. So, Henry Ford, Henry Ford is called the first great marketer for one particular reason. Yeah, you can put your books up. This is kind of discussion stuff. So Henry Ford, I've got another part of this I'll talk about in terms of marketing strategy. Henry Ford failed twice, went bankrupt twice. And one of the things that he envisioned was he had this vision of building a car that was worth $500 or cost $500. So why did he want the $500 automobile? The $500 automobile in 1904 was actually the average salary of the American worker in 1904. And that's how he came up with that thought. And his consideration was, if an individual could be able to buy that car in the equivalent of a year's salary, then that would be something that consumers might desire. So he has this idea, he has problems, but how does he achieve that? Here's another thing to think about when we're talking about the 19th century and the terms. Vehicles existed, plenty of them around, but each vehicle was a single made item. In other words, it was made as a craftsman makes a tool. No one is particularly like another. And that is the difficulty. You would almost consider them to be a match weapon. And so Ford had to come up with a way to be able to do it at the most efficient way with the least cost, or the ability of being able to do it in the most efficient and possible way that he could. So around the 1700s, what you found is this concept of interchangeable parts. So 1765, you have this person by the name of Jean-Baptiste Vaquet de Gardner, and he had come up with the idea of creating cannonade and cannons that had the exact same bore and the exact same rifle shot as every other cannon. And it was pretty interesting stuff. So he was able to do that, and an individual called Honor Blanc in 1786 said, man, that's an interesting idea. Let me see if we can do interchangeable parts in small munitions, like guns and rifles. He went to the French munitions manufacturers, and they said, heck no, we're not going to do that. If you can do that, then basically what makes one rifle any different from another? And he's saying, well, that's the point, okay? So what is the advantage of interchangeable parts, especially when you're looking on a battlefield? What would be the advantage of interchangeable parts? Pardon? Yes. What's the other?
Picture John with somebody else's.
Exactly. Yeah, you can take 3 broken rifles and put together a rifle and it works. Okay. That's the kind of thing that this came from. So he went to it and he had this idea and it went nowhere. So, you know, he kind of struggled with it a couple of years. Well, there was this guy in 1789 who was the American minister to France at that time by the name of Thomas Jefferson, who actually happened to be there while he was talking about it. See how these connections work, the innovations and all? Now, Thomas Jefferson is what we would call epistemic. The man had a widespread of knowledge. He wrote 20,000 letters in his lifetime. He was literally writing on the day and the moment of his death. I mean, that's the kind of mind that he had. He saw this demonstration of interchangeable parts, and he said that was pretty interesting. He didn't do anything about it, but he actually happened to see it, and it kind of folded it back in his mind. So fast forward to 1797, and the United States has to go through preparations of war with France. We did not, but we had to at least make preparations. The United States put out a contract for 10,000 weapons, and the weapons would have to be built in 4 years. And the one thing that it would be given is he would give you a $5,000 pay down and $5,000 more when you need it. Well, along comes Eli Whitney, the inventor of the cotton gin, very very important inventor in the United States. And he is desperately in need for money. And he thought of the idea of interchangeable parts. And what's his name? Oliver Merritt, who was the Secretary of State, gave him a pamphlet by Blanc. And he suddenly realized interchangeable parts could work. We could actually make this happen. And so this is a true story. For 2 years go by and he's not making anything. All right. So the president-elect at the time, Thomas Jefferson, okay, here he is again, all right, wants him to come and demand and tell us why it ain't working. So he's got all of these and he shows the interchangeable parts. He's got like 4 pieces of everything there. And he takes these parts and he assembles a weapon together and everybody's stunned. All right. Now, the problem with that is that those parts were not interchangeable. All right. He actually had numbered the parts so that he knew he could put it together. All right. But he sold the idea of interchangeable parts actually working. So they kept the contract. He started produce munitions, but it's really John Hall of Harper's Ferry who really was the one who perfected milling. Okay. Milling, by the way, is the equipment that makes the parts. Okay. That requires stronger alloys, more finite standards. And so now what we have is we have the equipment to make interchangeable parts. And so now what we find is in the expansion through the 1850s and the 1860s that America starts leading in this whole concept of standardized and interchangeable parts. And you see companies like Henry and Springfield and all of these others that are starting able to manufacture these things. It's kind of interesting. So the British, their kind of main thing for the industrial age was locomotion. All right, the locomotives, they're the ones that developed that. The Scottish developed the steamship. That's what they did. In the United States, it was the modern factory that created the interchangeable parts. And so we have one of those main things in which we're first start of the modern world now. And so this is one of the things that was not done with automobiles before, but is now it's being considered the time is right. The Civil War, by the way, is often called the first modern war because it's the first war that was fought with what we consider to be modern weapons. And it came from these factories like this. So you've got one thing into play. You've got standardized or interchangeable parts. The next is the concept of the assembly line. Now, the assembly line had been around for a while. That wasn't necessarily an idea or a process. But the one thing that Eli Whitney did that lasted forever is he came up with the concepts of systematic reviews, step-by-step instructions. And so assembly lines were real, but it wasn't really the assembly line that Ford was looking at. I'm going to show you one frame. I'm not going to linger on it too long, but assembly lines really started in the Chicago slaughterhouses to, instead of move the people around, you move the goods around. And that's the difference. Ford went to the World Exposition of 1896 in Chicago. He saw the moving assembly lines in the Chicago slaughterhouses, and that's ultimately what he did in bringing production to the modern era. All right. And so the modern era production, the way we know it as it is today, was started by Ford in coming up with this unique idea. People stay where they are, and you bring the goods to them and allow them to do things more efficiently that way. The last thing he did was he paid his workers an above living wage. And so what that meant was that the workers were making $9 a day. At that point, that was unheard of, because one of the things he wanted to happen is he wanted his people to be driving his cars. And so these are the things that we have into play. Now we're at the modern era now, and now this is where the modern automobile has been and where manufacturing has been in the history. So I want you to understand this from all of this stuff that we're talking about with marketing myopia and understand this about Ford. And this is a marketing idea, all right? Ford did not come up with interchangeable parts and the moving assembly line and then envision the $500 car. He envisioned the 500 car first. That's important. The $500 car was first. And then the rest of the story is Henry Ford following his vision. You have to have the vision first, all right? If you have the vision first, the vision will lead. But sometimes getting caught in the minutia makes things difficult. You can rest assured that Steve Jobs and Elon Musk have a vision, all right? They see the big pictures first, and that's where, if you're thinking about the true heart of innovation happens, it happens in the big picture first. Okay, let me finish up these slides on marketing myopia, and we'll take a break. I love this last thing that he uses, the visceral feel of greatness. It basically, the visceral feel, it's pumping through your body. You just know that you've done something great, all right? One of my favorite slides, or to think of it is this way, is you need to think that you as a firm is buying customers. You're not selling products. You're exchanging what you make to buy customers. That's your job. You don't produce products, you provide value satisfactions. You create the vision to have followers, and the followers are your customers. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, take note. They created followers. But great leaders need to know where they're going. Otherwise, anywhere you go will get you there. And if you go down any road, you might as well stay home. And so this is the heart and soul of what Theodore Levitt wrote about. That corporations and companies spend too much time thinking about the things that they make and not enough time on the people they sell to. The goal is to buy customers. And what we exchange is we exchange the products that they desire. And if we give them those things, it doesn't matter what happens in and around the world. Our customers will come back again and again and again. And that's it. Let's take a break. And we'll come back and we'll finish chapters. Well, we won't finish chapter 6. We'll at least finish price. So see you in 5 minutes or 10.
Well, not people it. So I mean, just I've never seen
Okay, we're gonna work on just price, and then we're gonna blow this popsicle stand, okay? All right. So we last left here talking about the pricing objectives. And one of the things that it's important for us also to understand is the concept of price elasticity. What does this mean? It means with the change in a given price, what is the change in a given demand? And so price elasticity accepts the concept that there are very many substitutable products that can allow consumers who are otherwise not brand loyal to easily move from one to the other. If the product is an exceptionally high part of your total expenditure and becomes even substantially more, that can be an issue as well. One of the things, the hidden things about gas prices, unfortunately, is that it impacts lower to middle income people more dramatically than others. And because it is a greater part of their total expenditures, even something as inelastic as gasoline, because we have to get somewhere, relatively becomes elastic, excuse me. Also, if there are notable price differences between comparable products, and if it's easy to compare prices between each other, those can also push things. So to give you the classic economics definition, okay? So price and demand. This is the classic price demand curve of economics, which says as prices go higher, demand is less. That's what it means, okay? What you're hoping for is to find some perfect equilibrium point where the price that you have meets the acceptable demand that you wish to have as well, all right? Everything they ever talk about, they always talk about these things, okay? It's a classic line. Everyone sees these things. Now, fascinating thing. We know this about luxury items or prestige items. So the economist who came up with this particular curve came up with a winner of a Nobel Prize in economics, and he finds that the price demand curve for prestige items is like that, okay? So actually what happens with items that are considered prestige, the quantity goes up as their price goes up. Which seems bizarre, strange, but hey, so are people. So yes. Price inelasticity happens when there's a lack of substitutes. So there are those items, shopping items that are known as staples. These items are bread, milk, eggs. They are considered essential. And whether or not the prices go up or down, you generally accept these items as being absolutes for purchase. If they are complementary products, in other words, in order to use a particular product, you have to be able to have another, that would be considered inelastic. I have routinely over the last 15 years bought my phones on the off market because I have not wanted to be tied, and now I'm tied because now I have an 11-year-old daughter who has a phone. So I've got the golden handcuffs now, all right? But that's a complementary product. That's also what's called price bundling too. There are perceived cost benefits that you get with your Apple that cannot be replaced, and it doesn't matter, you're going to get it no matter what. That's an inelasticity as well. If it is a pouring, drenching downpour outside Do you really care how much an umbrella costs? No. That's a situational influence, all right? A situational influence says quite simply that the demand is not up for negotiation. And then finally, if your product has something so unique and so special that it simply can't be got any other way. So does anybody know what a BlackBerry is? Okay, so good, you understand. BlackBerries were horrendous phones for years. But BlackBerry had the one single advantage is that it's the most secure operating system in the world. You are required by law, if you are a government individual, to have BlackBerry operating system on your phone, or that is in essence, well, it's not a federal crime, but you would call it it's a federal violation. Okay, I don't know what the difference is, but anyway, that is an example. Yes.
Good. At least thoroughly in the military.
Pardon me?
We've been able to use iPhones in the last 4 or 5 years.
Finally stopped it, huh? Okay, cool. Good to know. Well, iPhones are very, tight as well. That's been the big thing. BlackBerry, by the way, has totally done away with their machines now and gone to operating systems, and that's it alone, because the essence of what the consumers desire is the secure system, and the phones are secondary. All right. I mean, they just had that, they weren't functional. Okay. Interesting. Thanks for telling me that. So, pricing service products. So we've talked about that. How do you cost services? It's hard to find out before. Costing services is hard to determine in the beginning. Anybody who takes 1 foot in a lawyer's office will know that. And I hope you step out someday. Customers may not understand the process because sometimes anybody got a mortgage? Oh, God bless you. Okay. How many pages was your mortgage? Do you want to even guess?
There's like probably 30 pages of closing.
Okay. How long ago did you get your mortgage?
2019.
Okay, that's pretty good. Do you know how long yours is?
It was maybe about an inch.
Yeah, about like that. Yeah, about that much. Did you have like an SBA loan or anything too, or anything else? Oh, you had an easy one. Okay. Mortgages. The most difficult thing you'll ever go in through your life, check me if I'm wrong, is a mortgage. Mortgage takes usually 6 weeks to process, involves an average of 6 to 7 individuals, all right? And God help you if somebody makes one mistake or uncovers you in the loan process. I used to work at the bank too, okay? That is an example, is trying to understand the process can be mind-boggling. Some mortgages or some real estates will allow the real estate office to be both a broker for buyer and seller. Some states like North Carolina require a seller broker and a buyer broker, all right, or buying and selling agents, okay? So it just, you've got to know the processes, otherwise you don't know how to play the game, all right? It can be difficult also if brand names may not be well established, especially with services. If I said H&R Block, would you know what I was talking about? Yeah, what is it? Taxes, you know that, all right? If I said Sam's tax service, you may draw a blank, all right? Sam may be a great guy, who knows, but you don't know. And then finally, if I can perform the service with myself, which has been one of the #1 trends that has happened, especially in the last 5 years, then my feeling is I might be able to perform that function better than others. And so I've started to become, and I'm finally giving up. I've had enough of trying to schedule service people, repair people. And I've started repairing my dishwasher and my refrigerator because I've had enough. Okay.
It's more of a headache to get somebody to show up. And there's no-
Exactly. Folks, by the way, if you're done with school and you want to go do something else, be a contractor. All right. You'll have all the work you ever need for the rest of your life. These are the people who get, carpenters and plumbers to work on other people's work. They make six figures. Their list of things they've got to do is 1.5 miles long. And especially in this area where they're building giant communities out towards Banner Elk, they're making $50, $60, $70 an hour, hammering nails. So that's what makes life difficult right now. So base pricing strategy. Base pricing strategy means what is the standard accepted way that you accept prices to be set by your corporation. It is a standard way of looking at it. So the two most viable ones you'll hear the most of are price skimming and price penetration. Price skimming is to maximize profits early in the product launch to get as much money as you can to recover for R&D costs. Penetration means a low price to maximize the sales and to grow your market share as rapidly as you possibly can. Now, these can work together. The cell phone companies practically give phones away. They penetrate on the prices of the phones so they can skim the heck out of the cell service. And so that's what price bundling is, by the way. All right. Usually price bundling uses two base pricing strategies. They give you the hook and then they set the hook. Okay. Premium, of course, we all know is free trial periods to use something or a certain number of things that you can do and you can't do it anymore. And then basically what you're doing is afterwards that you'll be charged from then on. One of the best ones I've seen is a company called vMix. I use vMix to mix together videos. vMix gives you the full power edition for 3 months. And then it's like $50, which was a bargain. Prestige pricing induces this curve. Prestige pricing says that you're going to promote exclusivity and luxury by deliberately making the price higher and emphasize things like design, which is so key, design, along with functionality as a way of being able to demand prestige pricing. As a matter of fact, it becomes, in essence, its own connection. It is sold only through exclusive areas and in certain locations only through certain outlets. And those things enhance its ability to be desired. So EDLP, which means everyday low pricing, yes, it comes originally from Walmart, and it came from Walmart when they gave up the idea for constantly going around and trying to change prices all the time. Everyday low pricing means exactly what it says. They have a constant amount that they expect to make, and they adjust the prices daily. You could not do that unless you had one heck of a computer system to be able to do it. In 1992 to 1994, Walmart, I would say invented or even created what was called the VMS, the vendor management system. And what the vendor management system in Walmart did was it allowed the vendors to see every item they had on every shelf in every Walmart real time all over the world. But in order to become a vendor of Walmart, it required you to spend tens of thousands of dollars to be able to have the equipment to work with. So it, once again, the golden handcuffs, you do things together through mutual cooperation. That is one of the good essences of power, which we'll talk about when we talk about place, because that is the ability to create system-wide value versus one group having value over another. So everyday low pricing. Competitive matching is what Best Buy does now. If you go into a Best Buy and you find a particular thing online and you show it for being a lower price, they'll give it to you for that. By the way, my daughter got an iPad pencil 1, and the iPad pencil was $85 online in Walmart. Okay. So we went into the Walmart here and it was marked at $129. I showed them what it was online. Said, no problem. They did it. They marked it off. So just a tip. I'm sure you all know this, but if you've got an online price, bring it with you. All right. Because usually they'll be more than happy to match it. A non-price strategy is just basically that they're going to go after other variables. And along with that is the thought of creating and looking at the sustained experience in what you're going through. And so, especially when you're looking at IMC, when you're trying to communicate value, many times you'll do what are called slices of life. You'll see individuals who will be gathered together enjoying a particular product, and they're not necessarily talking about the price. And that would be in the essence of a non-price strategy, is where you're talking about an essential function like beer and tailgating, all right, go together like ham and eggs, all right, and you can't think of doing one without doing the other. I cannot barbecue without a beer in my hand. I just can't, okay? And so these are base pricing strategies. It's a foundation in which people work on. Now, just because we have a base price doesn't mean we can't adjust the base price. And how do we do it? Now, I'm really, I don't like this because there's one in here that isn't mentioned, and it's called rebates. And we'll talk about that later. But the first thing is a discounting off of the base in which we lower the price. And generally this is with sales promotions where we're trying to get a specific profit, or let's just say, sales within a certain time frame. You might see discounts, especially when they are moving out of a certain line, wanting to get rid of it. Reference pricing is when you have an established listed price, a manufacturer's suggested list price, and you use that as a reference, as a comparison tool to another price. Now, we do know this is that other cultures are much more sensitive to price differences. And as a matter of fact, they'll respond differently than we will. Some of them will be concerned that the price drops means it's a substantial loss in quality. So sometimes reference pricing has to be careful. Price lining is the exact same thing as reference pricing, but you use your competitor's price as the base price to compare yours with, which is interesting also in the United States. And some other cultures, you are not allowed to mention your competitors in your advertisements. So, odd pricing. What is that? Somebody read that for us. $2.99. Okay. It's $3 practically, but that's not how it works. All right. We read left to right. Okay. The first thing we read is the 2. All right. And because of that, we consider this price to be more reasonable than this price. And there's another reason too. We know psychologically that we consider an odd number. And by an odd number, it can be anything, just not rounded off, all right? We consider an odd number perceptually as the seller doing everything that they can to lower the price, whether they do or not. And that's what odd pricing does, okay? We just think it, okay? Price bundling is exactly what I had talked about before. Price bundling concerns itself with having two or more items together and that they are considered inseparable. And so you can't have a cell phone without having service, other than if you want to walk around with a cell phone, or like I have my old ones and I use them for like just doing videos when I'm in home, you know, when I'm using it with my local network, okay? And then finally, tiered pricing, which is basic to premium packages, in which you start at a layer at an avenue and then you work your way up. And so the whole point of pricing is to create a perceptual map in the consumer's mind and be able to identify and show value in one way or another. These are the strategies that we use pricing for as a way of signaling to the consumer that these are the things that they want. And we're finished with that. Let's get out early. I will see you on Monday. Yes.
Any strategies for how we can study for?
I'm glad you said that. It probably will be Wednesday, the way I'm looking right now. Online, here, I'll show it to you. Okay, I should have told you this. My bad. If you go to the website, I've provided a series of quizzes for you for each chapter. These are multiple choice questions. They don't mean anything to your grade, but they will at least review the questions that you're going to have before you actually take the test, okay? So I would urge you to go through that. It'll give you an idea of whether it's true or not. And yes, I use those questions for the test, okay? Yes.
So test is only multiple choice. Actually,
It'll be 30 questions, multiple guess, and it'll be probably 5 essay questions, maybe 6, and you can choose 4 of them. The essay questions will be worth 10 points apiece. The multiple guess questions will be worth 2 points apiece. Okay, and then I'll add those in. All right. Okay, super.
It includes the reading materials.
Pardon me?
It includes the reading materials.
Yes, it does. So I might not include marketing as everything. I'm thinking of it right now. I'm reviewing whether that's going to be viable. I'll let you know by Monday. Okay. So let's schedule the test for Wednesday and let's be ready for it then.
Yeah, put it on mine. I read the whole thing, but I'm not doing more. I couldn't say that.